Talking all things SEC football with one of the best in the business, my good friend Brad Crawford of 24/7 Sports, CBS Sports. He joins the airwaves once again. Brad, what's going on, man? It's been too long since we've done this. Hope you and the family are well. Appreciate you taking the time.
Good to be here, man. The spring transfer portal window is now closed, so my job's gotten a little bit easier now as we head into the summer months and media day season. Get started here in probably 6 to 8 weeks from now. So I'm looking forward to it.
Brad, before we get into everything SEC football, when it comes to things outside of making content and SEC sports, if you will, I'm a golfer. That's my big hobby. That's the thing I like to do. But you're a pickleball man. So sell me on why pickleball should become my new hobby. What makes it so great in your opinion?
I started playing pickleball around the 1st of March, and I was a beginner at the time. Now I think I'm a decent singles player, still learning at doubles. But, man, it's a fun time to be outside, enjoy nature, meet new friends. I find it interesting. I'm 37 years old, but sometimes my doubles partner out there might be, early 70s, and they're just as athletic as far as, pickleball is concerned. So a lot less running than tennis, but, just as much cardio and just a fun game, man.
Brad, let's start with something off the field first when it comes to the SEC. SEC spring meetings will take place next week in Destin, Florida. What do you expect the topic of conversation to be, or the top topics of conversation? Because I know there's a lot going on off the field right now with rumors of expansion and just the ever-changing landscape in college football. Like, what do you expect the talking points to be next week?
I think the primary talking point is either going to be centered around NIL and how that looks in the future, or, will we see a 9-game SEC schedule beginning in 2026? I think 2025 is pretty much set, pretty much the flip-flop of this 2024 schedule that we're going to see here in a few months. But I think beginning in 2026, Chris, we're probably going to go to a 9-game SEC schedule. And, I call it Cream Puff Saturday in November. Those games are going to be over with. We're going to see more SEC teams play power conference, non-conference games. And as a fan of college football, I just hope that, some non-conference rivalries are protected.
Are you a fan of the 9-game conference schedule? I know, like, thinking back 2020, COVID, that was obviously a terrible time, but also it gave us a taste of what purely a conference schedule felt like. And I agree to your point. I mean, you think about Carolina, Clemson, you think about Florida, Florida State. There are many others as well that those rivalries have to be preserved. But that 10-game all-conference schedule, I mean, it was electric football week in, week out.
And it separates the contenders from the pretenders rather. So, by the end of September, who's good in the SEC and who's not, because like you said, the schedule in 2020 back in COVID was not loaded with, easy week 1, week 3 games. So I'm in favor of it. I don't think the SEC necessarily has to go to it to dominate this expanded playoff era moving forward. I think in 2024, Chris, we may see maybe 5 SEC teams, and then, 4 in the Big Ten possibly get in. I just find it very interesting that these two leagues, the SEC and the Big Ten, are further separating themselves from the rest of college football. And, they don't have to strengthen their schedule by any means to, still impress the committee.
Brad, let's jump into your SEC quarterback rankings. And I want to specifically talk about the bottom of the list. Which fan base did you catch the most grief from for putting their guy at the bottom? And of that crop in the bottom of the list, again, it includes guys like Lenora Sellers at South Carolina, Brock Vandagriff at Kentucky, Taylon Green at Arkansas, Peyton Thorne at Auburn, Diego Pavia at Vanderbilt. Of the bottom of the list, which of those guys would you bank on most making a surge this season? Maybe we're talking about them as a top 7 or 8 quarterback in the league by season's end.
I think if Lenora Sellers can find a wide receiver 1 and South Carolina gets to bowl season, then he's a guy who could certainly go from 15th in my rankings to maybe 10, maybe number 9. I don't see him moving into that elite tier, Chris, not as a redshirt freshman at least. But I find it interesting. Auburn fans gave me flack for putting Peyton Thorne. I think I had him 13. I did it a few weeks ago. But, I mean, Hugh Freeze swung and missed in the transfer portal at quarterback this cycle. He returns with a incumbent guy like Peyton Thorne that has thrown 10 interceptions each of his last 3 seasons as a starting quarterback, 2 at Michigan State, 1 on the Plains. And you look at how much, money Auburn spent in the portal and in recruiting, signing a bunch of elite wide receivers. They don't have a quarterback who can give them the football. So yeah, I'm curious right now if Auburn has, potentially stunted its 2024 growth under Hugh Freeze because of Peyton Thorne returning. We just know that he's a guy. He's not really a difference maker, at least what he's shown so far. So I think Lenora Sellers maybe going from 15 to 10 would be my biggest jump.
Brad, let's stick with the Auburn Tigers because you mentioned, the unwillingness of Hugh Freeze, for whatever reason, to go out in the portal and snag a quarterback. Maybe the guy he wanted wasn't there or whatever, but we know what Peyton Thorne is, and it's not very good. I mean, last year he was at the bottom of the league of all qualifying quarterbacks when it comes to passing yardage. Like you mentioned, I mean, Auburn has completely flipped the skill position players, what they've added at the wide receiver position. They might have the SEC's leading rusher this year. What do you make of the Tigers, though? Because I'm seeing a lot of mixed opinions on them. There's some that I think feel like, and maybe this is a stretch, but that Auburn can be in that conversation of maybe they're at 8 or 9 wins, and we're talking about them as this sleeper college football playoff team. There are others that think 6-6 might be in the cards yet again. So, what do you make of Auburn right now?
I think somewhere in the middle. Their win total, I want to say, is 7.5. I would probably have Auburn just under that at 7-5 finish. They're a team, Chris, that I think can strike fear in some of the other top 10 SEC programs. It's a schedule that by SEC standards, it's somewhat favorable. They don't play 5 top 15s like Oklahoma and South Carolina do, for instance, but it's still a roster right now that has a couple holes. They're going to be much better at wideout. Cam Coleman, 5-star signee. They got Penn State's Keandre Lambert-Smith, who was one of our top wide receiver portal guys this cycle. So they're going to be better there. And then on defense, about half the starters return. And, Hugh Freeze likes what he has on that side of the football. But, Auburn was not the program that I thought the Tigers would be last season in Hugh Freeze's first campaign. They gave up the 4th and goal, long 4th and 30 play, actually, to Alabama to lose the Iron Bowl, and then failed to show in bowl season. And all that preceded that loss to Mexico State at home. So Hugh Freeze, this is a pretty important year for him. Not saying he's on the hot seat here in year 2, but, I mean, if Auburn fails to make bowl season, he's certainly on it because, they spend too much money, invest too much in that program to have back-to-back losing seasons. So I think forward progress will be made this season. But going back to Peyton Thorne at quarterback, I think he limits, the possible ceiling for this team.
Brad, let's talk the 2 new members of the SEC, Texas and Oklahoma. Again, you and I were talking off air. You went and collabed with our friends over at CBS Sports Unfiltered, which we're live every single day there, 4 to 5. Be sure to check it out. Shameless plug. But you went and talked with those guys. Obviously, folks are high on Texas. There's skepticism with Oklahoma. And again, you echoed that. Your thoughts on the 2 new members, and it sounds like you have them going different directions as they begin life in the SEC.
Yeah, I called Oklahoma a mid-tier program last week. Saw some media. They're a mid-tier program in the SEC in 2024. I don't know how this program is going to look 5 to 10 years from now if Brent Venables is still the head coach, still recruiting at elite level, which is a necessity if you're the Sooners going into this SEC. And now expanded playoff probably benefits a team like Oklahoma, but the 2024 schedule, Chris, is not conducive to success. 6 top 25 teams, 5 teams I think are in our top 16 in our post-spring rankings 24/7 Sports. And oh, by the way, there's 4 new starters along the offensive line with a first-year starting quarterback in Jackson Arnold. Now, he's a talented guy, former 5-star. He's the person that kind of pushed Dylan Gabriel late in the year for snaps last year. So good that Oklahoma staff didn't mind Gabriel leaving in the portal to go to Oregon. So that speaks volumes on him. But OU's a team where I think the ceiling is probably 8-4, and that would be a really good year based on that schedule.
Brad, Georgia or Ohio State, who should be the number 1 team in the country going into this season, in your opinion?
Yeah, if you're asking me, I've got Ohio State 1, Georgia 2, and Ole Miss 3. That's been my top 3 since January. Haven't changed my mind there. Ole Miss is a team, obviously, right now is a paper champion because it's the best roster, at least on paper program history. But Ole Miss, unlike Ohio State and Georgia, still has to prove it. They've got to make a playoff for the first time ever. So a lot more pressure on Ole Miss right now than at Ryan Day and Kirby Smart.
Do you think the pieces come together in Oxford, Brad? Because I thought Lane Kiffin put it best. They've got an extremely talented roster. Are they a great team yet? Is yet to be seen. Are you buying the Ole Miss hype? It sounds like you are, but do you think the pieces come together like we're all expecting?
I think talent-wise, Ole Miss is going to be a playoff. Jackson Dart returning was huge. They've got 3 elite wide receivers, have a tight end who's potentially a first-team All-SEC guy. And then they completely revamped the other side of the football, which is what cost them last season in losses at Alabama and at Georgia. Lane Kiffin said after both of those games, we don't have the dogs in the trenches. Well, there's a couple Ole Miss boosters that made sure the dogs were in the trenches this offseason for a team that won 11 games last season and probably got better, since that season ended with that win over Penn State in the Chick-fil-A Bowl. So I'm looking forward to seeing Ole Miss. I think they're a playoff team. I'm not calling, the Rebels to be an SEC champion right now, but it's a team that is playoff or bust. That's been said a lot. And, Lane Kiffin, in my opinion, is one of the SEC's top head coaches.
Now, Brad, if I gave you or anyone else a sheet of paper only with the numbers on it, with the roster, and said, hey, this is the 3rd most talented roster in college football based off blue chip ratio, you'd probably say they're probably a lot for the college football playoff. This is the Alabama Crimson Tide I'm talking about. A lot of change. Nick Saban's no longer there. Now it's Kalen DeBoer's show. You got your quarterback back in Jalen Milroe. Again, still 3rd best in the country based off what I saw previously when it comes to blue chip ratio. The bottom line is they're still extremely talented. You got Bama missing the playoff entirely. Explain that one.
I do. I've got 4 teams in the SEC making the playoff. That's Georgia, Texas, Ole Miss, and then the winner of LSU, Bama. And since that game's in Baton Rouge in November, 6 months out, I'm just siding with LSU right now being that playoff team. Bama's a team that I think has some questions. I think they lost more than they gained in the portal. I know Kalen DeBoer pretty much said that isn't true a couple weeks ago. But when you lose Caleb Downs, a first-team All-American safety, you lose Julian Saying, a 5-star freshman quarterback who he might not have played this season, but he was the future of the franchise, so to speak. You lose him to Ohio State. You lost your starting center to Ohio State and Seth McLaughlin, although Bama fans probably wanted him gone after, dropping the ball on the turf a few times in the playoff and throughout November. But Bama's a team right now that, I think probably is 9-3, 10-2 at best. 10 wins will get Alabama in the playoff this season if they can get there, but the schedule's tough, man. They host Georgia, go to LSU, go to Wisconsin early. They host USF in week 2. USF's a team that I think can get to the playoff from the G5. I'm not calling that upset, but that's a game that I'm going to be interested in watching because USF has a quarterback that had 4,800 total yards last season. So, like I said, I like the Kalen DeBoer hire. He's got some mighty shoes to fill following arguably the greatest coach since you and I have been doing this, Chris, and Nick Saban. So I'm very interested in watching Bama this season to see if, they can surpass expectations. And even as a top 10 team preseason, I think a lot of us, including myself, don't see Bama, being a legitimate title contender, at least not in 2024.
Brad, you said you've got 4 teams from the SEC making the 12-team college football playoff. Forgive me, that feels kind of low. I don't know if this is my SEC bias showing, but my question is this. If there's going to be a 5th or let's say a 6th team, which I know it feels crazy to talk about half the field being SEC, and I know there's many out there that would not exactly love the idea of that, but I mean, let's put the best teams in. Either way, who's right there on the cut line for you when it comes to, right there being on the edge, the 5th team, the 6th? I know you mentioned no Tennessee. I think they're obviously a college football playoff contender. Some have talked about, of course, Bama's right there. Maybe, God forbid, Texas A&M if we're going to drink that Kool-Aid again. Who's right there on the edge for you, though, as far as college football playoff contenders? Missouri,
yeah,
did you say Missouri, by the way?
I did not. They would be in that.
Oh, Lord. Okay.
It would be in Alabama, Tennessee, Missouri, threesome there for that 5th spot. But the reason I got 4 teams in, Chris, you figure SEC champions in, 3 more SEC, that's 4. Big Ten champions in, 3 more Big Ten, that's 8. Then you've got ACC Big 12, that's 10. 1 automatic G5, that's 11. So then you've got 1 spot left. And a 10-win Notre Dame is definitely getting in over a 10-win, 4th or 5th place SEC team. So I just think year one, it's a bit of a stretch to think one league, SEC or Big Ten, gets 5 teams, and I think 4 will be the magic number. But Missouri's a team that, like Ole Miss, has a favorable schedule. I think Missouri plays 3 top 25 teams this year. That's it. And if Missouri, goes 1-2 against that 3-game stretch, doesn't make it to Atlanta, but finishes 10-2, you're probably in. I think the best case scenario, honestly, is if I'm an SEC team in this expanded playoff, I kind of don't want to play in the SEC championship game, because if I get to 10 wins and I'm not in it, I'm making the end game anyway.
Mm-hmm. Don't add another loss to your resume when you don't have to, right? That's kind of the name of the game. Brad, so what you're telling me is there's going to be chaos either way, whether it's over that 4th spot or that 12th spot. We're going to have unlimited chaos this fall is what it sounds like. So, and then people are going to tell us this is why we need 14. This is why we need 16. And then it's just never going to stop.
If you're not a bag carrier in the SEC or Big Ten, you're going to be upset with the final vote in December.
Mm. Brad, let's talk about sort of the middle of the pack of the SEC. I mean, I think of teams like Kentucky, who we'll stick with Kentucky first. Do you feel like Kentucky? I find Kentucky really interesting, Brad. It does seem that there's kind of this sexy trend where every single offseason, there is this team for whatever reason that they're just a really fun team to talk about, and they catch a lot of hype, and they've overachieved expectations. But I feel like last year Kentucky has sort of soured for some, where you had Devin Leary at quarterback, Barion Brown, Dane Key. It was the best wide receiver corps they've had there. And, of course, those guys return. Kentucky fell short of expectations last year. Now I almost feel like, Brad, I know they got a brand-new quarterback in Brock Vandegrift and some different pieces, but, now I kind of feel like, are we sleeping on Kentucky? Do you think that's fair?
I don't know if we're sleeping on Kentucky. I think preseason win totals tell us a lot about how these teams will finish, man. Vegas odds makers rarely have it's usually, if you're projected 7-5, a good year's 8-4, a bad year's 5. And that's kind of where I see Kentucky. You got to remember, Brock Vandegrift signed with UK when Liam Cohen was still the OC. And then a month after he signed with Kentucky, Liam Cohen went back to the NFL. Now he's got a new guy there. So I don't know how that marriage is kind of going to work out. UK has done a pretty good job in the portal the past couple cycles. I think the one primary strength of Mark Stoops' coach teams is, they're going to have that gritty mentality at the line of scrimmage. And that does win in the SEC, but only gets you so far. It gets you to that 7 to 8 win range. You got to have difference maker dogs to get to the elite level. So Kentucky's a team that, I'm sure Alabama and Georgia aren't looking forward to playing this season. But I also don't see those 2 programs necessarily worried about Kentucky. We saw, we've seen Georgia in recent years. That Georgia UK game has been billed as a top 25 game, and it's over in the second quarter. And until Kentucky shows that they can play better against Kirby Smart and that 5-star laden roster, I'll say the same. So Kentucky's a team that might be flying under the radar nationally, but if you cover the SEC, you kind of know that. Okay, 7-5, 8-4 is about where Mark Stoops is going to be there.
Which is really good for Kentucky, by the way. We should highlight. He's done a great job there. Texas A&M, Brad, let's zero in on them really quickly. Am I crazy for not drinking all of this offseason Kool-Aid? Like you mentioned, I was stunned with the over-under win total for the Aggies. And what I don't understand, and I know they've got talent in that roster. Mike Elko, I think, was a great hire. I don't understand why we just can't allow Texas A&M to overachieve for once. We have to set the bar so incredibly high where anything outside of a great season, Brad, an exceptional season, is going to be falling short of expectations. Why do we keep doing that? And am I crazy for having conservative expectations for A&M this year?
Well, Texas A&M did go 9-1 several years ago. And they finished, I think it was 5th in the final rankings, just missed out in the playoff. Might have been the COVID year, actually. They were 9-1. That was kind of the height of A&M. even better than those Johnny football years. I think this year that there's a bit of I would say cautious optimism because despite losing, 36 players to the portal after Jimbo Fisher left, Mike Elko still signed a top 5 class on the transfer market. So the money in College Station is still flowing, man. It's still buying players. And they have that week 1 home game against Notre Dame. That'll be one of the most intimidating atmospheres in college football. Kyle Field, possibly a top 5 Notre Dame team coming in. If the Aggies can win that game, say 27-24, I mean, that could exude major confidence over the rest of September and heading into that second month of the season. So I'm actually high on A&M. I think they're being underrated right now. I've got them 19th in my preseason top 25. ESPN did not have the Aggies ranked. I like the roster, and Connor Weidman's a guy who he's going to be a third-year quarterback. And if he's a really good top-tier SEC quarterback, he's probably 3 and done at A&M and could be an early round pick. So people compare him to Josh Allen, and that's high praise, even though Josh Allen can't win a playoff game.
Texas A&M has burned me repeatedly, Brad. So I don't know. Maybe I'll come around, but I'm just like, man, am I really going to let myself do this again? And sure, I'm sure many are saying the same thing. Brad, before we get you out of here again, I mentioned the middle of the pack, the lower third of the SEC. I think of teams like Arkansas, South Carolina, Florida are kind of all bunched together. I think of those three, Brad, and I'm not trying to throw Shane Beamer in South Carolina in where necessarily like the pressure is the same. Obviously, I think Sam Pittman and Billy Napier are both under immense pressure entering this year. But of those three situations, stock up, stock down. I mean, are you expecting changes at both Arkansas and Florida? Could you see one of those three teams surprising? All three, it seems, have really difficult schedules, highlighted by Florida's just gauntlets of a schedule. Is there any way Billy Napier makes it in 2025? And again, the situations at Arkansas and South Carolina, could one of those teams achieve, if you will, or overachieve, I should say?
In my 50 prediction for the upcoming season last month, I said that one SEC head coach would be fired, and that was my projection. Sam Pittman at Arkansas. I feel like the Bobby Petrino hire is a last ditch effort, along with getting Boise State transfer Taylor Green to kind of fix things in Fayetteville that I don't think are fixable. The offensive line hasn't been good in 3 years. That was kind of Sam Pittman's MO at Georgia, that he was going to bring a stout, front seven with him to Arkansas. That really hasn't happened. I think Arkansas fans are sort of jaded now on Sam Pittman. They kind of want him gone and want the 2024 season to be over with. That said, that all came before the Jaden Rashada news. If it comes out that Jaden Rashada and his family can prove that Billy Napier did offer him $1 million to sign during the early signing period a cycle ago, then that's probably enough ammo for Florida to just light the fire and get rid of Napier too. So I think Florida is in a rough situation right now. The schedule's brutal. I mean, even if Nick Saban was Florida's coach right now, best case, he's probably 7-5 this year based on that schedule. I mean, the last 5 weeks, man, not in order, but they play Ole Miss. Let's see, LSU,
yeah,
Texas. I mean, it's just
Florida State. Yeah,
it's crazy.
It's a murderer's row. Yeah, those last couple of weeks. So I guess you would take the under if I set the over under at 1.5 SEC head coaches fired in 2024. You would take the under on that.
I'm going under.
Okay, only one.
Unless Florida goes 3-9. Yeah,
I think that would do it. Brad, last thing, and I'll get you out of here. I know we talked about them earlier, but the Texas Longhorns, do you feel they can realistically challenge Georgia for that top spot in the SEC? I mean, again, there's some out there. The question is Texas back? It gets thrown around constantly, and whatever that means to you, that's what it means to you. But do you expect Texas to thrive year one in the SEC? Are they going to take some lumps? Is there anything that's going to maybe surprise the Longhorns? Because they've been hearing about it for years, and I know Texas is ready for the challenge, and obviously they went to Bryant-Denny last year and laid it on Bama. But your thoughts on Texas and potentially challenging the Georgia Bulldogs for number one overall in this conference?
Yeah, I don't think Texas falls back at all in the SEC, especially not this year. Best quarterback room in college football with Arch Manning behind Quinn Ewers. Anything bad happens to Quinn injury-wise or he's not good in September, You've got a really good quarterback behind him who is ready to assume this role of QB1. This time last year, Chris, I picked Texas to make the playoff. I was one of the few guys to do that nationally. They made it. I took Texas to win at Bama several months before that game happened. They won at Bama. And now I feel like Texas is going to beat Georgia when Georgia comes to, the 40 acres, I think in September, maybe October. But I think worst case scenario is Texas is 10-2. I do have Texas making the SEC championship game, and Texas, along with Georgia, those are my two SEC locks to make the playoff. I just think this team's too talented. One of the few programs nationally, Chris, that went out and not only addressed their program needs in the transfer portal, but they got top-end guys. They signed 3 receivers they really wanted. They got Trey Moore from UTSA, who had 13 sacks last year in the G5. So they signed some elite players in the portal, and Steve Sarkisian is one of the best game day coaches in college football. So I am staying aboard the Longhorns bandwagon.
Brad Crawford, 24/7 Sports, CBS Sports, does a fantastic job. Check out all of his work. Brad, I promise, last thing, EA Sports College Football comes out. I think it's less than 60 days, the week of SEC Media Days. Going to be a crazy week for us both. What's the first thing you're going to do when you get the game? You're going to play an exhibition? You're going to start Road to Glory? You're going to jump into Dynasty? Like, what's the first thing? Have you thought that far ahead?
I'm going to the team select screen, and I'm spending 45 minutes on uniforms.
I love it.
I don't even care about gameplay right now. I want to see what all new uniforms are in this game. And I actually read yesterday through a little VIP thing that EA has a deal with power conference teams that when they debut a new uniform during this season, it's going to be in the game for us users the following week, which is just outstanding for us, man. I'm really excited though about new stadium renderings. We're going to see the new scoreboard at Williams-Brice. That's now 12 years old, but it's new to the game. So I'm looking forward to everything, man. But especially the aesthetics. I don't care much about gameplay as long as they got visors and alternate uniforms and some throwbacks in there.
And for those that don't know, Brad and I used to run on the sticks years ago on the PS3 online play, and it'll be great, Brad, to have the rivalry renewed. And maybe our next segment of content on here, it won't be us talking about ball, it'll be us playing ball on EA Sports College Football. So we'll have to make it happen. Brad Crawford, 24/7 Sports, CBS Sports. Brad, it's always a pleasure, my friend. I appreciate you doing this. Keep up the great work. Of course, you're going to be putting out all kinds of content as we continue to count down the days to kick off. So, again, everybody stay tuned to that. But, Brad, always a pleasure, my friend. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks a lot for the invite, man. Always appreciate it.